Hi everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about something that's relatively near and dear to me. I'm going to be talking about arcades. They have always been relatively popular ever since they were first created back in the 70s or 80s. And recently they've kind of fallen out of circuit, mainly due to the virus and most people not being able to really go out. And of course, on top of that, you also have home video game consoles and downloadable video games that you can play at home becoming more and more popular, so they're not really even needing to be a reason to leave your house to play video games in the first place. But nevertheless, arcades play a very important role in the history of video games, and for a long time they were a very popular hangout. I mean, even in recent years they still have been. So, arcades started out just, being full of your basic video games, and most of those were also games that were ported to home consoles like the Atari or the Nintendo Entertainment System. Primarily, you would have, all your games like Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, Galaga, all that stuff, and many, many others that I can't remember off the top of my head. And all of these games, originated as arcade cabinets in the arcade that you could go play, insert a quarter, and you can play the game, and then all that stuff. And that's pretty much all there was to an arcade back then. At least the ones that I know of / have heard of. And, all of these games did have ports on home video game consoles like the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, Sega, Atari in some cases, depending on when the game was made, what era it was from, and perhaps the developer of the game itself. For instance, Sega made arcade games, and those would be on the Genesis. Capcom, they were a third-party developer, or possibly second-party developer for Nintendo. That sort of thing. However, what I really wanted to hone in on for this video is how arcades kind of evolved and changed. Exactly when this happened, I don't know, but arcades are not anything like that anymore. There are a few, quote, retro arcades around that I've heard of, and I've never really been to one, though I do want to go to one at some point, that are still like that, like arcades were back in the 80s. But in more recent years, they've changed to be more rigged. In the sense that, and you probably know what I'm talking about, any kid who's, my age or younger would probably know this, that nowadays arcades are more about tickets. You get tickets from the games, and then you can go to the prize counter and get prizes with your tickets. It's basically an alternate form of currency. You put quarters into the machine or possibly pay money to get tokens, and then, or in the newer arcades, you have swipe cards that you can, put money on the swipe card, and then you swipe it in the machine to get credits to play the game. And you play the game, and the tickets either come out in physical form or get added to your card. And the objective nowadays is all about winning these tickets. So, arcades took a pretty sharp left turn there, if you ask me. And if you ask me, it was one of the pinnacles of arcades becoming more rigged. I guess I don't exactly know what happened. Perhaps people realized that, oh, all these games that people could play at the arcades, they can play at home, so we got to have more of an incentive for people to come. So they introduced the incentive of these prizes you can win by earning tickets. And a lot of the arcade games now, they're bigger and more grand. And sure, a lot of them are really fun, skee-ball, basketball hoops. You can't play that at home. The closest you could get is maybe a virtual basketball or skee-ball type game on the Wii. If such a thing even exists, there is Wii Bowling. That's kind of close to skee-ball, but definitely not the thrill of the physical thing, because skee-ball is definitely one of the least rigged arcade games to date, and that is a staple of arcades. But then, yeah, so that's fine, and you have ones like the basketball hoops, and then you have some strategy-based games that give out tickets and all that. But then you get those are all at the low end of the spectrum. But then you get to the far end of the spectrum, which is stuff like the Big Bass Wheel. Oh my god, the Big freaking Bass Wheel. I have a good friend who was always obsessed with the Big Bass Wheel. And you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever set foot in an arcade, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The Big Bass Wheel is this large wheel that has a big lever that you spin. And there's all these different ticket values on different sections of the wheel. And there's that one where, you know, you have the circle that's the big amount, and then these little tiny bars that stretch out to the edge of the wheel where the notches are, and then if it lands in that little tiny notch, you get that big value. And if it lands in the outer part, it's some really tiny amount, like 2 or 3. And it's just there to tease you. It's there to tease you as a very, very small amount. And then you have other ones, you know, like there's the Wheel of Fortune one. There's other like light up wheels that go around and you have to stop it directly on the button. And I have done those before, and it's interesting because certain jackpots are less rigged. For instance, there's a Dave & Buster's near me where I can get the jackpot on this one particular wheel every single time. But there was a, I forget the name of the place, but some other arcade that I would also sometimes go to, not a single time could I get it to land on the jackpot there. So there must be some kind of programming thing the arcade people can do to decide how rigged they want it to be, you know? Because you'd think it's simple statistics and mathematics or possibly skill, and in most cases it is, but a lot of the times it can be rigged and dumb luck. There's a lot of these, and the Big Bass wheel and the other, you know, light-up wheels are just one of the examples I can think of off the top of my head, but there are certainly other ones too. You know, there are ball drops sometimes, and one of the other more infamous ones is Deal or No Deal. Deal or No Deal in the arcades is slightly different from, you know, home console Deal or No Deal or the actual game show. The reason being, first of all, the guy voicing it is clearly not Howie Mandel, and secondly, unlike in the game show Deal or No Deal, where, you know, Howie says, like, okay, so, you know, we have 26 cases, you know, the amounts were put into the cases by a third party that I don't know about and none of us know about. Instead of it being like that, you see the amounts before the game starts, and then they do that crazy thing where all the cases shuffle at like warp speed, and it is almost impossible to actually keep track of where all the cases go. One of the only strategies I know of is to use the slow motion video recorder option on a cell phone. Which, if an arcade attendant catches you doing that, you're probably going to get scolded anyway, so you got to be discreet about it. And there's a time limit. I know there's a time limit on deciding your case anyway, so you got to be speedy as hell about it. Yeah, so there are some arcade games on the far end of the rigged spectrum, and I'm sure there are others that I'm just not thinking of at the current moment, but It really is an interesting world how arcades have developed, and they've just become more rigged, and I kind of see this as in most of my local arcades, one of the big things is that I don't necessarily want any of the, quote, prizes behind the counter. Most of them are just garbage trinkets that I have no use for whatsoever. If anything, I might just buy a bunch of candy. Because really, that's the only thing I see of having value, because you have the big prizes, you know, like the Nintendo Switch or the freaking electric guitar or the miniature go-kart or whatever there is. And there are always some obscenely high amount of tickets that you could never get unless you came there every day for like 3 weeks and spent like $100, you know? It really is just... It really is just kind of a rigged system and a sign of the times that arcades have to try harder in order to get our money. And it almost kind of reminds me of a casino in that sense of like, the house always wins, you know? Because back in the olden days, we would just put our money into the machines, play the games, and enjoy ourselves. Now it's more about winning prizes and, you know, rationing your money to win the tickets and all that stuff. It just, I don't know, it gives me some casino vibes with, yeah, how the house always wins, you know? How it kind of like fools you into thinking that you're getting bang for your buck when really it's just an optical illusion, because if you compare these prices to, you know, like, you could probably find anything at an arcade at Five Below for, you know, a third of the amount at least. And some other ones, there's the, oh yeah, another really rigged one is the one where you put in a token or a quarter, and it goes in there, and it has like the conveyor belts that push like this, and you try and get more quarters or tokens in there, so that coins fall off the edge when the conveyor belts are pushing, and you know, the more coins that fall in, the more tickets you get. that is so rigged because they go out so far onto the edge and the coins can like cling onto each other before they actually fall off. It's maddening. And I remember my one grandmother, I don't know what it was about that game that she always loved to play it whenever she would take me to an arcade, but yeah, it would almost never actually fall. And then of course, now these next machines I'm going to talk about, they went straight to the chase in terms of the riggedness and the incentive of prizes. I'm talking about the crane machines, you know? These things are the epitome of arcade evil because they skip the ticket shebang altogether and just go straight to the prizes. You put in your token or quarter or swipe your card or whatever you need to do, you get your credit, you push the start button, and then, you know, you have the little lever and the trigger button on top to move the claw. And, you know, the claw goes down, grabs the prize you want, 9 times out of 10, or more like 99 out of 100, it drops it and you fail. So, yeah, that thing completely misses the ticket shebang and just goes straight to the prizes. And, you know, the less rigged ones, you can tell when one is rigged, because the less rigged ones might just have plushies or small toys or something like that. But then there's the more rigged ones that have, you know, like a freaking iPhone 6S or whatever the new iPhone is. They're up to like iPhone 11 or 12 now. But years ago, I remember seeing a claw machine that had an iPhone 6S in it, or an iPhone 6, something like that, which was like the newest iPhone at the time. And there was $100 bill in there, just a, you know, like the bluish $100 bill, you know, Ben Franklin's face on it and whatnot. And I was just like, there's just $100. That was weird. And then there was, you know, like the newest Nintendo handheld and just all this other crazy expensive stuff. And I remember just looking at that thinking, how the hell is one even supposed to get that? I mean, this thing's got to be rigged beyond belief. And I didn't spend any money on it to find out, but it just looked so alluring that it almost like appalled me, just to the point of just like, wow, they really are doing that. But of course, some claw machines are a little less evil. If it seems that generally you can gauge the rigged and evilness of a claw machine by its prizes. If they're crazy good, it's no doubt trying to just lure you in and you're going to get baited. If it's just plushies or something, you know, less of value, then there might be a fair shot that you can actually walk away with something without spending your entire allowance. Yeah, so in the grand scheme of things, arcades have come a long way, and I would argue it's more so for the worse than the better. I mean, I understand where the incentive is to, you know, win tickets and all that, but at the same time, I do kind of miss the old days. Maybe that's just because I'm a fan of old video games, and I like old better than new 9 times out of 10, but still, it seems like kind of a sign of the times, just, you know, arcades becoming more rigged and more jerky and just not what they used to be, you know? And, of course, going off of arcades, one last point I want to make here, you also have different kinds of arcades, all these different companies that have arcades in general, you know? Because sometimes you just have, like, independently owned arcades, but then, of course, you have all the big branch corporations, you know, like Dave & Buster's, Round One, Chuck E. Cheese's. Of course, that's falling into obscurity now and will probably be nothing more than a memory in a couple years from now. And there are other places, too, that I can't remember, but I do kind of have to wonder if arcades are going to be obsolete relatively soon, because, like I said at the beginning of this video, with a global pandemic having been plagued us for over a year now and not really being able to go out into crowded spaces very much, and with home video games and all that becoming more and more popular every year, I do have to wonder if arcades will ever become a thing of the past. I mean, I'd say it's going to be more along the lines of Blockbuster, where yes, they'll fade into obscurity, but there will still be a few out there, or at least one out there, that's kept around for the novelty of it. But I don't know, we'll see. I mean, times change, and we've already seen how arcades have evolved, but we'll see. Will they evolve again, or will they just die off? Who knows for sure. Alright, well, that's all I really have to say about arcades. For now, might make a part 2 on this a little later. So if you guys have anything to say about arcades, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video.